Welcome to Corralling the Chaos podcast, where we talk publicly about the things you're worried about privately. My name is Angela Leah, and I'm your host. This is the event industry podcast for companies and crew, where we're going to dive deep into things like what does our industry need that it just doesn't have? What are the things you want to know, but you're just too afraid to ask? And what are the biggest opportunities ahead for our industry? We're going to go deep, and nothing is off limits. Welcome back to another episode of Corralling the Chaos. Today with me, I have a very special guest, J Ocana. Jay is the co-founder, president, and COO of Reaction Audiovisual in California, which specializes in conferences, conventions, corporate meetings, and esports. He's been in technology for over 30 years and in the event industry for nearly 20 years. Just got to say, we typically don't see that a lot where people have a tech background, but love that. He built his company from a simple idea, which was to bring high-level production quality with common sense pricing to the events industry. So, welcome, Jay. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're excited about this. I know you and I have had a chance to sit down a few times over the years, and I just think you have a really fascinating background. And I think Reaction AV does some really amazing things and experiences for your customers. So I'm really glad you're here. So
Thank
thanks.
you so much.
Well, let's jump in. So, your early career was not in events; it was in technology, which, like I said, is not something we typically see. A lot of owners and runners and operators of these companies typically come from the event industry, and then work their way up and say, "Hey, you know what? I could probably start my own company and do this." So, I love that your background is actually in technology, but you also held positions in sales and marketing roles outside of the industry. So I would love to hear, how exactly did you transition and get started into the events industry?
Well, it's a very complicated, long background story. I could probably talk about it for about an hour and tell you all the tidbits, but I'll just try to keep it brief. So, I'm really a technologist at heart, and it took me a lot of years to kind of figure that out. I remember being a little kid, and my mom worked as a mainframe computer analyst, right? Back in the day when computers took up entire buildings. And the first IBM PC came out, and she thought computers were like the future. And this is back in the day when people were, having computers at home was not a foregone conclusion. So
Right.
she bought a PC for the family, and I was a little kid, and I taught myself how to code and taught myself how to use it and how to mess with it and try to tinker with it and all that kind of stuff. And just really fell in love with kind of just technology, if you will. I always joked that I was the first person with an email address, but I had nobody to email. So it really was like kind of boring.
Category
But
of one.
but anyway, and I used to set up BBSs, which were early days of the internet, kind of concept before the internet. And anyway, so I remember graduating high school, and they told me, "Hey, you're good at math, you're good at computers. Well, why don't you go into engineering?" And I went into engineering at SC, and about a year and a half in, I'm like, "This is boring. This is not my thing." I mean, I love the tech part, but I really didn't like the just sitting in front of a screen and looking at that all day long. And so I switched into business and kind of went down that path. And then when I graduated, I ended up getting my MBA, and I went and started working in enterprise software. I was recruited at a show that I was actually speaking at. It was Internet World. I don't even know if that's around anymore, but it was the presentation I was giving was about the intersection of business and technology. This is again really early days,
Mhm.
and I was recruited to a software company. And long story short, I did that for a while. .com explosion took that company out. I kept going in enterprise software, and eventually, the company I was working for was part of the whole scandal in early 2000s of cooking the books, WorldCom, Enron, all those. And so
Mhm.
the company went under, and I decided, you know what, I'm done with venture capital. I'm done with all that stuff. I'm going the entrepreneur route. And I did some computer stuff, some computer hardware distribution and stuff, and I sold out of that company. And when I was in the midst of trying to start another company, I was actually trying to start another software company. An old friend of mine, we ran into each other. It turns out he moved into my community, and we had been like best friends in like grade school and junior high, and we kind of lost touch, and we reconnected. And anyway, he was in this industry, and he'd been doing AV for 10 years. And he talked to me and said, "Hey, I really want to start this business, but I have no idea how to start a business, and I have no idea how to launch this." And so I was in between things. I'm like, "Hey, sure, I'll help you." And as I started looking at more and more into the industry, to create a business plan to really understand what are the metrics, what are the economics, how do you make money, how do you ascertain clients, all those sorts of things. I was like, this is kind of cool. And hey, guess what? It does have tech, right?
Yeah.
There is
Oh,
some cool
definitely. Yeah.
technology, right? And we do even more cool technology these days than we even did back then. But
Mhm.
anyway, that was kind of it. And we just kind of put our heads together and got some money together and launched it. And it's been like a crazy ride ever since.
And that was what, 20 years ago?
That was, let's see, 2005. So what is that? Almost, that's 18
Close.
years ago.
18. Yeah.
Early 2005, so a little over
Yeah.
18 years ago. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, but so yeah, like I said, it's been great, and it's been an explosive ride. And I didn't even know about this industry. So I got to be perfectly honest. I literally, like, I mean, I know obviously events. I went to events, but I never thought about this as an entire industry or business model. And but when I started looking at it, I'm like, this is a really neat business model. I like the rental aspect of it.
Yeah.
The company I had sold out of right before was a computer distributor, and so you bought it for X, you sold it for X plus 10% or 15%, and that was the model. Where in the audiovisual industry, you're owning the assets, you're renting out the assets over and over again. I thought that was a really interesting economic model.
It's so funny, how you landed in this industry. We talk about that a lot on this show. The number of people, myself included, who kind of land on it accidentally, by chance, some relationship, right? Something. And then it's like, man, this is, we're a consumer of these events, but we really didn't have any idea until you really kind of join the industry, all the expertise and talent that goes into producing these things. And to your point, what a great business model, right? Being able to
Yeah,
re-rent the same piece of equipment over and over again versus just cost plus selling hardware. So you have a very similar story, but definitely
yeah,
unique
and I
from some of
also
the
I also
understandings.
enjoy to me, I guess that sounds bad, but our business is really stress driven, and I know that sounds like a bad thing, but I actually like the fact that everything's got to be perfect when that
Stakes are high.
CEO, yeah, when that CEO walks on stage at 10 a.m. on Monday.
Yeah.
Everything's got to work. The presentation's got
Yeah.
to work. The sound system's got to work. Everything's got to
Yeah.
work, or you're dead.
Yeah.
So, and that's a bad thing, I guess. But I kind of enjoy the fact that everything's got to be, in place and working.
Yeah, everything has a crescendo, right? And
Yeah,
so many industries and companies, it's just kind of, just kind of moving, you're
yeah,
maintaining versus kind of working up to that crescendo, if you will. So you're right. I think that is probably what keeps a lot of people around. And to be able to say, wow, look
yeah,
what we created, look what we pulled
absolutely,
off, despite
absolutely.
all of these obstacles, we literally did it.
We tell our client, we literally tell our clients that, especially people who are more novice, expert event planners and marketing people, they know about the events industry, they know how hard it is to execute. But we tell clients right up front, like, hey, you know what, there's going to be issues. There's no chance that there's not going to be an issue. It's not a matter of whether there's an issue. It's a matter of, are you hiring the right company that knows how to
Yeah,
manage those issues, where it's not going to affect the outcome of what you're trying to accomplish.
absolutely. Yeah, that transparency is key. Well, what do you think? Kind of brings me to my next question. So,
Sure.
what do you think is Reaction's competitive advantage?
Wow. Okay. Great question. I like that. Well, one of the reasons why we started Reaction, or the concept was, and this is my business partner from being in the industry. Remember, I wasn't from the industry, right? So from him being in the industry and seeing it, what I started doing from a business, MBA perspective, analyzing the industry, is what we found, or what I found, is a really highly fragmented industry, right? You have the top companies that are hundreds of millions of dollars that are doing audiovisual, and there are some benefits there that they provide a decent product. They're professional and whatnot. But you also have a situation where those companies tend to be very pricey. Their customer service is not quite what it is, because
Mhm.
it's a smaller company, because they just have a lot of red tape and stuff. And then there's these little, like, mom and pop companies, and some of them are DJs on the weekends, and sound
Yep.
sound AV providers, as well, when they're not DJing. And you have kind of that dichotomy, and you have a very fragmented market. And then on top of that, you have people that just specialize in audio, or just specialize in lighting, or whatever it is. And really, what the concept of Reaction Audiovisual was, to have the professionalism of top-notch companies with as good or better technicians, as good or better equipment, but with what we have termed common sense pricing, which is really not nickel and diming clients and not overcharging for things. And when they're in a bad situation, it's not like, oh really, you needed that, well that's going to cost you 10x, that kind of thing. And bringing that kind of professionalism to the audiovisual industry, that mid-market kind of concept. And so that's really what we're about. And the other thing is, from that stems, when you have that kind of mentality and that kind of attitude of servicing your client, customer service truly is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Everyone talks about it. Every company in every industry says customer service is the most important thing, that sort of thing. For us, it really, really is. Executing it, however, whatever it takes to make things happen is what it is. I remember years ago, I don't go to that many shows anymore because it's a lot of work running a company. But I remember years ago, I was at an event and someone had rented some computers from us, and they had put them up on this. I don't know why they did this, but on these huge like boxes, if you will, but really high, like 15-foot boxes, and they had the monitors up, connected, and they were running presentation, and they couldn't get the presentation to work. Now, a lot of AV companies would be like, hey, you rented the laptop. Like, I'm not responsible for content. Like,
Right. Not my
figure it out,
problem. Yeah.
right? Not my
Some
problem,
will.
right?
Right.
But it was like 15 minutes before the show went live. They were freaking out. I walked by. I'm like, hey, what's going on? They're like, this is. I'm like, okay. I sent someone, go get me a ladder, right? You're not even supposed to do that in this venue. But I said, go get me a ladder. Climb up. I'm good with computers. So I got the ladder, climbed up there, figured out that their formatting was off, fixed a couple things, boom, 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 got it running. All their monitors and stuff went up, and their content was up right before show started. And they
Yeah.
were so thankful and grateful. Well, that's a client that you earn for life, because they realize that you truly are providing 100% customer service and you mean it. It's not just a tag phrase, right? And so I think those are the kind of things that we really get into our techs, and we tell them this is what we got to get this done, because they have this concept of an event and an execution, and this is what they want to happen. And even if it's out of our jurisdiction, if you will, we got to jump in and make things happen. And so I think that that's really what separates us.
You said a lot there that I want to kind of come back and kind of, no,
I
there
told you
was a
I'm
lot of
very
good stuff
verbose.
there.
I can
No,
go
no, I don't
forever.
mean it that way. A lot of good stuff, good nuggets. First I want to go back to what you said about, I think I read it in your bio too, about the approach of bringing common sense pricing. And you talked about not nickel and diming and things like that. Do you think that's still an issue in our industry? I mean, do you see your competitors not utilizing common sense pricing, or have you seen that kind of level out?
I mean, I think it ebbs and flows, right? I think that pre-COVID, when things were pretty hot. I mean, our industry was really growing in 2019. I feel like I saw a lot of that. I feel like companies were just, hey, charge what you can get, to make this happen. And I saw a lot of price, what do I call it, appreciation,
Hmm.
especially on in-house organizations and whatnot. So I've seen a lot of that. COVID obviously hit, wiped us all out, started back, fresh. Now it's
Hmm.
not so much, right? But the post COVID, so let's say 2021, 2022, we saw maybe the prices being more competitive. But 2024, I feel like, or 2023, and projecting out 2024, it looks like people are gaining those prices back up. Because
Yeah.
they're using things like inflation and whatnot. And obviously, in our industry, the costs have skyrocketed, right?
Yeah.
Labor costs are way more expensive. Logistics, shipping is way more expensive. So there
Hmm.
definitely are costs, but I also think sometimes companies also utilize that as oh, this is a way to charge more, because not only
Right.
do I have more costs, but also, hey, people get that. Everybody knows about inflation. It's all over the news.
Yeah.
Let's charge more.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say with common sense pricing also means, um, you know, a lot of times organizations, we've been on, at one point or another, we've been on the other side of needing to have an event, right? So I've, had an anniversary party for my parents, our wedding, many, many years ago, whatever that is, whatever those events are, we've been on that other side. And so when you put yourself in that person's shoes of what they're trying to accomplish, what's the atmosphere they're trying to create, what's the feeling they're trying to create, and whether it's a corporate event, a trade show, whatever, someone has a vision of what they're trying to do, right? And they also have a budget. because no matter what or who you are, you have some sort of budget, okay, of what you're willing to spend and what you want to do. And having a conversation with your client, being like, hey, you know what, you're willing to spend X and you want to accomplish this. These are the things we can do, and this is how we can make it happen. And having that kind of pricing model versus like, well, we got to charge for this much for this and this much for an LED wall and this much for a projector. It makes it really tough to really be consultative
Yeah.
selling to your client. You become
Yeah.
more of a vendor, and
Yeah.
we try to become more of a consultative partner, not a vendor.
Yeah, I want to talk about that for a minute too, because you're right. It's not just the pricing, it's the approach. And obviously, again, your background and experience in sales, sales and operations. Uh, One thing we see a lot of is when it comes to selling is event companies that put a quote together, not so much a proposal, but they put a quote together that really just kind of lists their gear and, hey, here's how much it is,
Yeah,
rather than taking the time to propose the value that they're going to bring to the table, right? Like kind of some of the things you talked about, right? Like putting yourselves, having that empathy of saying, hey, here's the outcome you're trying to get to. Let's be consultative. Let's get creative with different paths to get you that
yeah,
outcome. But just kind of curious what your take is on that, since, historically, I think our industry has done far less proposing and far more just kind of quoting, like
quoting.
making it a commodity. And it's such a missed opportunity to
Yeah,
really position themselves as a creator of value.
yeah. I think that interesting you say that. So, coming from the software enterprise software industry, you really focus on everything you focus on is value proposition, okay? Because when you're going to a company and you're saying, "Hey, we're going to sell you this, enterprise resource planning tool, or we're going to sell you this human resources application, for big corporation, whatever it is," you really have to come at it from a value proposition, right? Because it's not well, this costs, this much and this costs this much. It's really what's the value proposition, what's the return on investment, what is what are you going to gain from making this purchase and this investment. And so that value proposition concept's always kind of been in my head. And also just looking at the industry from the get-go, for you to be able to provide value and be customer service oriented and have that value proposition in our industry, you can't be looking at charging, here's how much a projector costs, here's how much a screen costs. Our company, we have several salespeople that have been very successful, and we have others that have not been successful and are not
Sure.
here anymore. And the ones that have not been successful could not cross that chasm. They wanted to get in the battles of quoting. And I always told them, like, hey, you cannot get in that battle because number one, we don't make the projector, okay? Christie or
Hmm.
Panasonic, whoever makes the projector, and the other vendors that we're competing with are providing projectors as well, right?
Yeah,
So if we're just
that's right.
getting in that battle of, oh well, we're going to charge this much for the projector, and it's only a 2 day or 1 day,
Yeah.
it doesn't work. And one of the things that we also talk about is this kind of a sales stack is how do you move up what I call the sales stack. And this is again kind of from the software industry, is how do you build that value proposition. And if you're talking about projectors and breakout rooms, you're not there. If you go to the next level and you're talking about operators and what kind of tech services you're going to provide, okay, you're getting a little bit better, right?
Closer.
Getting closer, adding more value.
Yeah.
And then if you start talking about, well, let me help you with like what that room layout should look like, and well, you know what, you really don't want to do rear projection here because of this or that kind of thing. Now you're getting more and more into the consultative part. And then, but what I started off with was kind of that overall, well, what are they trying to accomplish and what's their budget? And that's what we need to focus on to try to make that happen versus all the little, let me quote these line items. And there are times with our clients where we just list the line items and we have a price at the bottom.
Yeah.
There you go. That's what it's going to cost to make this
Yeah.
happen,
Yeah.
and that's just what it is. So I think that at the end of the day, companies that focus in our industry, we are a service. That's the product we sell. The product we sell is a service, not a product per se. And the more that you focus on service, 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 what can we do? How can we make things better? Let's help you choose a venue before you've even chosen the venue. Now you're really in the
Yeah.
beginning because now you are a partner, no longer a vendor.
Yep.
And you are a person that the last thing I'll add to that is, like I said, I could talk very verbose. I could talk all day long. The other thing I'll add to that is it also creates a concept of in sales called stickiness, right? is how easy is it for that client to dump you and move on to somebody else.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
if you're just talking about projector pricing and what the speaker system costs and everything else, it's not that hard. Somebody could just come in and charge less and try to earn that business. Whereas the more you are consulting and providing that value proposition, understanding their needs, executing to those needs, you create natural stickiness. It's really hard for that client to leave you, which is a good
Y-
thing if you're trying to be
you're
the client
right. And I think
customer.
it's, a shift to learn how to compete on value versus competing on price. Um, and I think some do it very well. And I mean, let's face it, it takes time, right? To
Yes.
truly consult versus just turning around a quote. It takes intentionality, takes listening, it takes problem solving, it takes being creative, it takes empathy, as you said, all those things. But I think that's where the deals are done, right? When you can figure
Yeah.
out how to compete on that value and less on the price. But I love the concept of common sense pricing, because you can have all the value in the world, but if you don't have the common sense pricing, that's a problem too. So I love the idea of kind of combining those two. Well, my next question is something that I kind of previously asked you. What was one thing that the industry has always done this way that you think maybe should be reevaluated? And you answered that with manual processes around booking subrentals,
Mhm.
labor, and trucking.
Yep.
So, talk to us more about that and why it's important for our industry to kind of get to that next level. And what does Reaction AV do to automate things that should be automated? Because not everything should, right? Some things should do it, and then some things shouldn't. But talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think that I always joke that, and this is kind of a known thing, right? Every industry operates on Excel. It seems like, right? Every industry has, every
As
industry,
baffling
everyone,
as that is, yeah.
right? As baffling as that is, people are using spreadsheets, and we are certainly fall into that category. But really, if you think about what a spreadsheet is, and it's a great tool, right? But what it really is a manual tool. It's a manual tool that allows you to make mistakes, right? How many times you add something up and you're like, why isn't this adding up? And you have the wrong sum or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or it allows you to type in the wrong information, or whatever else. So to me, having automated processes as much as possible is the a success critical success factor for any company. And I think our industry, we have a CRM system. We have a production slash inventory management system, quoting system. We have, of course, Lasso, which we love, to book our labor and travel and whatnot. And then we have an accounting system, and then on top of that, we have other systems as well that are kind of in between there, such as Microsoft 365, SharePoint, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And the challenge is, and this is a challenge still for us, we have not solved this problem. The challenge is having all those systems kind of talk to each other, and how do they talk to each other, and how much information do they share. And that's what creates those manual processes and those breaking points where people are manually creating spreadsheets to take this information and kind of match up with that information, and
Right.
and do those sorts of things. And I don't think that's a good thing. I think that's a thing that causes problems, can cause errors, and we experience them. Somebody puts in the wrong, oh, we have four of those. Actually, we only have three, that kind of thing. And I
Yeah.
think that the challenge for our industry, so go back to your original kind of question, is the challenge for our industry is, if you look at other industries, there are fully integrated software platforms that industry utilizes. So if you look at, I don't know, car dealership industry, right? The
Yep.
car dealerships. You go to a car dealership, buy a car. There's like two different products out there that manufacture that software, and the
Yeah.
software to buy that car manages their inventory, manages the back end, manages the financing, manages
Mm-hmm.
uh, the sales process, everything soup to nuts in that one enterprise software application. We really don't have anything like that in our industry that I have found. Maybe someone can contact me and say we have that, but I haven't really found that. And I think that that's what causes the biggest grief, is that you don't have that system. And so you're constantly, my salespeople hate entering information in their CRM and then re-entering it into the quoting production
Yes.
system, right?
Yep. Yep.
duplicate entry. What
And
is
then it
that?
gets re-entered again for invoicing and
And then it
re-entered
gets
again.
Yes, and we've created some, we've created some integration points, right? But integration points are, it dumps it into a batch and then it picks up the batch and moves it into the other system. That's not true automated process. And so
Yeah.
I think that that is the holy grail for our industry in terms of internal operations, is when we can have kind of an enterprise class system that sits above all that. I think that's, would be amazing. I mean, it really would.
It seems like our industry, and we talk about this obviously a lot. We're in technology, obviously, but there are a lot of horizontal solutions trying to solve a problem for a vertical, right? Our vertical.
Mhm.
And so there's no vertical SaaS
Right.
solutions out there for our industry. To your point, like car dealerships have it, restaurants have it, construction has it, all these big industries have it. And I think our industry, we've talked about this a lot too on the podcast. It has been so underserved in so many ways. I think it's just this hidden gem and it's a
Yes.
massive industry.
Yeah.
And I think because it's a complicated industry with a lot of nuances, that a lot of these just horizontal solutions for any of the workflows that you just mentioned, it doesn't quite fit, right? It's like, trying to fit a, square peg in a round hole. And so then people are like, well, it doesn't quite fit 'cause it doesn't really speak our vernacular. It doesn't really understand the nuances of our workflow or some of the crazy rules we have in our industry. And then they just revert back to Excel.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, well
but
well,
you're right.
and
I do think
not
that's an opportunity.
not to interrupt you, but I'll make it even more basic than that. Remember, I didn't come from this industry, so we jumped in, and I'm like, I'm running operations, trying to figure out how to do all this stuff, right?
On
And
Excel.
right, and I'm searching for a accounting system that can do rentals, and doesn't exist. I mean, now there's specific ones, as you said, to our industry, right? But back then, when we first started the company, I was just looking for basic accounting, and there was
Right.
no accounting system that really allowed you, Peachtree, QuickBooks, NetSuite, any of those ones that you want to talk about. I looked at all of them, and not one of them specialized in the rental market.
Yeah.
It was all buy a widget, sell a widget, and it
Yep.
was very frustrating.
Yeah.
And so it's gotten much better in the almost 2 decades, but it's still a huge opportunity, I think.
Yeah. I would agree. Well, speaking of automation and all of this talk around AI lately, it
Mm.
is happening so fast, rapid develop. It's like daily versus, some of the other technologies that might be, versions that are, a year or two apart. I feel like the iterations now are literally days apart, which is fascinating. But where do you think AI will play a role in our industry?
Well, AI is something that, it's kind of a big buzzword, right? Because it incorporates so many different things into this concept, right? And some people think of, like Terminator and Skynet, and it's going to take over the world, and I don't know, maybe it will, I don't know. But really, the reason why AI is such a big thing now is truly because of the ability of the supercomputing. The supercomputing technology has accelerated, and the level of programming and putting in this code into a computer to teach it, human concepts is amazing. And that part is accelerating really fast, and that's what's pushing it, making it so pervasive in our industry and every industry. I think for our industry specifically, is going back to the automated processes and talking about how do we do those things. That's where AI can make a huge impact in our industry.
Yeah.
Give you an example. One of the things that we spend some time with is when we do, really large trade shows and events, and there's 100 breakout rooms. Okay.
Yep.
And the 100 breakout rooms are running at all different times in different rooms. And some of them run, 8 to 10 on Monday. That's it. One runs, 2 to 4 on Monday and 6 to 8 on Wednesday. Right. And you're like, well, we have 100 rooms with 100 projectors and 100, screens and whatever else. It's like, well, no, we really aren't utilizing 100. We might be
Yeah.
utilizing
They're
50.
overlapping, but yet they're not.
Yes, and
Yeah.
do you know how long that takes for one person to sit down and
Yeah.
kind of map it out with the
Yeah.
tracks, and okay, and then oh, this room shuts down and that's gone for the rest of the show. So now we're going to move that projector and screen over here. Imagine AI. It's processing that information at
Mm-hmm.
exponential
Light
speeds.
speed.
You literally could just plug in the information, upload it, and boom, it's already figured
Yeah.
it out for it. This is how many projectors you need, how many screens you need, and when you need them.
Yeah.
That's the kind of power of AI, is really
Yeah.
computing human thought at the speed of supercomputing. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
And anytime you can look at a problem and have that kind of ability and speed to deal with that issue, that's where AI is going to make a play. So it's early on. I don't know exactly all the different things that it'll do for our industry. That's just an
Mhm.
example I could think of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great example. My hope is also, so many people talk about, oh, well, I didn't know till after the fact that this had happened, and my margin, I thought it was this, but then it came
Mhm.
in and it was really like this. And so I
Yes.
think a lot of it could also be just, having access to data in the moment and time in which you need it to make better decisions versus kind of finding out after the fact. So again, that AI kind of building that data and
Yeah,
saying
I mean, job costing is a
that.
big one, right? I mean,
Hmm.
we spend lots of manpower hours on job costing, and every
Yeah.
time we think we've got it right, and this and that, it takes some time to do that. I could see AI solving that issue quite
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah. Me
So
too.
yeah, there's a
It's going
lot
to
of
be
opportunity.
fascinating to see. Yeah.
Yes, hopefully it doesn't take over the world, but yes, I'll be fascinated.
Well, I sure hope not. I sure hope not.
It's so funny.
Um,
I read these articles, everything from the Wall Street Journal to Wired to whatever, and some of them are so like, oh my gosh, AI is going to solve the world's problems, and then the next one's like, AI is going to destroy us all,
yeah,
it's probably something in between. It's a new tool that we need to figure out. The internet's not good or bad. It's just the internet. Social media
that's
is not
right.
necessarily good or bad. It's just a
It's a
tool
tool. That's right.
that can be good or bad. So
Yeah.
it's
I think
kind of
it'll be interesting even 12 months from now to go back and listen to this conversation.
yeah,
And what do we know about AI 12 months from now? Because it's just happening so fast. So it'll
very
be
much so.
interesting to be continued.
Yeah,
That's a
right.
whole topic for another day, perhaps. Um,
Sure.
Talk to us about any frustrations you have with the industry. Like, and what I mean by that is opportunities that you think our industry has that it's not taking. So, like, what do you hope for our industry with all that we've learned, certainly over the last 3 years, but also as you think about, your 18 years in the industry, what do you hope for our industry?
Wow. Okay, that's a big one. Well, first of all, I hope that there's never another pandemic lockdown.
Amen. I
Right?
second, third, and fourth that. Yes.
Yeah, right. So I think that that's a big one. That was a really tough part of our I mean, obviously, everyone's existence that's in this industry, right? And it was a tough road for us, and we survived, but other companies didn't survive. And I think that total lockdown was a very, very bad thing. But the thing about that is, the one thing it did show me, and probably showed other people in the industry, is that we don't have that big of a voice. And I think that there were certain industries. It's so funny because that when all that happened, there were certain industries that just got just hammered, right? Airlines, hospitality, whatnot. And I felt like the government and other people and the media and everything would talk about all those companies and those industries, and the government would be like, "Oh, the airlines need to be bailed out, and we need to give them money, and da da da." And over here, this industry is suffering, so we've got to help them out. And I never heard truly about our industry. And I
Never.
know there's organizations that popped up that were trying to lobby or garner
Yeah.
focus and attention. But the
Our
reality
friends at the
was,
Events Coalition, yeah, they
yes,
they
yes,
made it.
yes, and there
Yeah.
were people trying to do stuff, and I think that's amazing that they were, but we were doing it in the rears. We were doing it in the
Yeah.
hindsight, right? And I think
Yeah.
one of the things for our industry as a whole is kind of making ourselves known. I don't know if that makes sense, but just kind of people aren't aware of our industry. They don't, and our industry is huge. And I feel like we're like the ugly kid or something. Like they keep them over there because we don't want to know about them. And I think that that's one of the things that the lockdowns showed to me was, here is an industry that went to zero. I mean, literally, we were like I would joke, right? That what we do as a business was made illegal by every government in the world, right?
Yep.
For all intents and purposes,
Overnight.
overnight, boom, like this, flip a switch.
Yep. Done.
And yet, how many times did you turn on the news or look in the media, whatever else, and they spoke about our industry and what we were going through and whatnot? None. I mean, almost nothing that I could
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
And I'm a pretty, educated guy. I read a lot of different things and I see a
Yeah.
lot of different media, and there was nothing. And so I think, I think the opportunity for our industry is, regardless of a lockdown ever happening again or anything like that, is just making our industry known and to the media, to the government, to whatever that is, so that we get some attention, and
Yeah.
knowledge of what we do and how hard our people work and what we accomplish. And I think that's, I don't know, I think that's kind of I guess that would be a hope that that would happen at some point.
I hope we talk a lot more about that. Like, I think our industry is the only one that doesn't have its own SIC code, which to me is
Yes.
crazy. I cannot
Yes.
think of any other industry that doesn't. And
Yes.
again, I think a lot of it is people appreciate the events, right? We consume them, we go, we show up, it's
Yeah.
great, but we have no idea because our industry has done such a great job staying behind the scenes, behind the
Hmm.
curtain,
Yeah.
versus to your point, we need to have a bigger voice. We need to brag on ourselves. We need to demand more,
Yeah.
because, and I don't mean that in a aggressive way, but it's time to toot our own horn. We serve a great purpose for our society, and it's important. People, I mean, people came out in droves as soon as you could gather. It was very clear we are made to connect with other people. And
Absolutely.
part of that is being in person, being entertained, doing these events, these businesses, their user conferences, their sales kickoffs. It's the bread and butter. It's how they make their money. And so I think that's a great thing to hope for our
Yeah, and I
industry.
think one of the things that I would read and would drive me crazy, because I think God created us to be in fellowship with other people, and
Hmm.
I think when even with the lockdowns, just in general, there's some mental health issues that have arisen from that, where people are they lost that connection. People got depressed, they had anxiety and whatnot, and it's because humans are really meant to be in fellowship. And I would read articles where they would be like, "Well, is the live event industry dead? Because we can all just do virtual now in Zoom." And I'm thinking to myself, this person writing this article has no clue what they're talking about, because
Yep.
that can be hybrid and whatnot. We're still doing some of that stuff. That can
Yeah.
be a complementary,
Yeah.
but being in person in a live event with other people,
Yeah.
around community, around whatever that topic of discussion is, or whatever that event is irreplaceable. You can't replace that with Zoom calls. I'm sorry, you just can't. So
100% agree. And I know our audience is all screaming, Amen, Amen, yes, yes,
yeah,
because we all feel that, right? Because we all not only paid the price for it by
yeah,
being in this industry, but again, just as human beings, we paid the
yeah,
price for it. And
absolutely.
I think we're all still really hungry for that. And so I don't see that going away.
Yeah,
I
no,
think those are great insights, and I appreciate you being on the show and kind of sharing your experience. I have a few takeaways. First is, you talked about competing on value and selling value and being empathetic and solving problems, and it's different than just, again, common sense pricing is important, but adding on top of that selling value. So I think that's a great takeaway for our audience. The second one is leveraging automation and knowing how to leverage it, right? It doesn't mean
yeah,
you over automate it, you over engineer things, but leverage it where it's appropriate. It's a tool to use. And then the third one is what we just touched on. The opportunity for our industry right now is we need a bigger voice. And I hope that for all of us, I hope everyone listening does their part to do that. And maybe our industry will look a little different in a few years from now, where everyone will know exactly what we do and why it's important,
I
and
won't
more
hold my
money will
breath,
be
but I hope
invested
so.
into it. Yes,
I won't
all
hold
of
my
our
breath, but
hopes
I
for
hope
sure.
so.
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for
Well,
having me. I had fun, and hopefully I didn't talk too much.
no, this was great. No, I really appreciate you joining. And for those of you that enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, reach out to us at podcast@lasso.io. Thanks, everybody.